You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
Hey, welcome to Beer Sessions Radio on Heritage Radio Network. I'm Jimmy Carboni. I'm the host on Beer Sessions Radio. Wow, we're up in Portland, Maine. It's the first CiderFeast here, and I'm going to hang out with some of the really interesting up-and-coming cider makers in the state of Maine. So let's go around the room, and you guys introduce yourselves.
Hello, I'm Joy Cartwright. I'm the marketing director for Fogtown.
John Stein, owner and cider maker of Fogtown Brewery.
I'm Jared Carr, the co-owner and cider maker of Cornish Cider Company.
David Sawyer, content creator of Bone and Bottle Reviews.
And Zach Kaiser, cider maker of Absalom Cider Company.
So we got to come up to Maine. We had some friends invite us, including Zach from Absalom. Zach, give us a little overview of what the Maine cider community is. I know that for other friends like Andy Brennan and people outside of Maine, they talk highly of the apples.
Yeah, I mean, Maine has an incredible history of orcharding. So actually where my cidery is in Winthrop, Maine is one of the original orcharding places in Maine. So some of the early settlers in Maine planted orchards on our street that we're on. And kind of that history has kind of continued on with foraging. We also have a very great history of tracking down foraged apples, and John Bunker kind of leads that, which kind of makes this state kind of a great place for apple conversations, and it's kind of pushes that direction of conversation towards the apple first and foremost before even the craft of cider making even gets started, which is kind of exciting. But yeah, I mean, it's an honor to be here, and because we have such a long history in apple growing. There's a lot of fun old like tales about cider making in the state of Maine, and I'm not the only one that can speak to that, but yeah, it's a fun time.
Thanks for inviting us up. We had a great time here today at CiderFeast Portland. Big thanks to the Oxbow Brewery friends who hosted us here in Portland. And we want to capture this gentleman because they're not going to stay too long. We've all been here all day. But John, a little bit tell everyone how you went from brewing to making cider, and also, what apples are you sourcing from? Today, the Down East, your hard cider was one of my favorites.
Oh, thanks so much. Yeah, Fogtown started as a brewing company almost 7 years ago, and we make beer that's distributed throughout Maine, a little bit down into Massachusetts. But we wanted to offer people something different. Our license just allows us to sell folks what we make in-house, so we can't, buy other people's great ciders and serve it to them. And so instead, we decided to make some of our own wine, some of our own cider, so we could offer it on tap. We started noticing, just like Zach was saying, there's so much great cider history up where we are in sort of down east area. Orchards, but also homesteading. So we find these old homesteads with old overgrown orchards, and we can go after the high season that the brewery season is over and go pick and forage apples ourselves, bring them to the brewery, and use our brewing equipment to help us process the apples and come out with some cool stuff.
So there's like a real community of apple lovers up here.
People love apples. There's so much history, so much knowledge. John Bunker as well, and all these guys sitting around the table have been doing it longer than I have, and are a great resource for people who are just getting started like me.
That's great, man. Thanks for coming out. You're welcome to stay with us. I know you might want to leave, but we're going to try to get you in if you still have time. Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry.
Jared, let's just talk more about you. I mean, everyone here says, Cornish is one of the best cider makers in the state. I know from our friends at Anoche. Thanks, John, so much. Thank you. Thanks, Joy. You're one of the best cider makers in the state. I know you did a collaboration with Erica at Anoche a few years ago with the Backyard Ciders. Tell us about who you are and all that.
Sure. Yeah, my business is named Cornish Cider Company because it's started from my hometown in Cornish, Maine. I was a brewer for a long time, and
you worked at Allagash, didn't you?
I did, yes. And I was making cider at home, and I've just kind of had a little more of a draw to fermenting apples because Cornish used to be a very big apple town. Growing up, you'd always see the seasonal pickers come into town in the different colored school buses every fall. The biggest event of the year in town was our Apple Festival, and the two largest buildings in town were built for apple storage. So it just felt like a little more of a true sort of product to make from where I grew up. And also I'm planting varieties that are grown up, that have grown from seeds out in the wild in Cornish. So it just felt like it had a little more of a sense of place product.
Great. Well, most of the show, because we've got Zach from Absalom and Jared from Cornish, we're going to have you guys talk to each other. But first, Damon, just say hi and tell us what we're drinking.
Yeah, so right now we're drinking it's called Big Falls from Norumbunga Cidery here in Maine. I've never had their stuff before. This is actually quite fantastic. It's got a nice little bit of bite to it, very easy drinking. It comes in a 12-ounce can, a little bit different than a lot of the 750s that we got to try today or people pouring out of their growlers. But yeah, Maine is such a diverse selection of cider. I've really been impressed. This is my second time out to the Portland area, and it was really great to try all the different ciders instead of just one or two like the last time I was here.
You know, this is a special event, and one reason we're here is that I feel like a lot of the Maine cideries don't make it outside of Maine, which is kind of a good reason to come here. So, Zach, you guys, let's think of some subjects that you and Jared want to talk about as exceptional cider and apple geeks.
Yeah, I mean, it's exciting, and thanks for doing this festival with us. I mean, it's an honor to be able to get to share our ciders with a new host of people, and Oxbow being great hosts. And I think this is like the official first cider festival in Maine. I can't think of one in the last 8 years that I can think of. So it's an honor to get to do that. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the cider makers here in the state of Maine are just really excited about apples, and us personally at Absalom, we're really excited about doing a lot of co-fermentation, but also with other fruits, and then also kind of showcasing what fruit can do, what apples can do in this state. So we have our tasting room up in Winthrop, and we have a lot of ciders we serve there, but we also serve other people's ciders, so we kind of try to support the whole industry as best we can. We serve wines, we serve beers, we serve cocktails to kind of show how cider fits into a whole bar program, that it can be integrated into all bar programs, because that's kind of how we think that this industry can grow, is if cider can be integrated into a full bar program. Yeah, that's something that's kind of interested us, and I think that cider has a lot to build on, and we keep diving into the past and also keep pushing forward. And I think there's cider makers all across Maine doing both of those things, which is kind of exciting. I mean, it seems like we have some cider makers like ourselves making smoked cider, which is a completely kind of out there cider, and then also people who are diving deep into the past, foraging apple varieties that are have a lot of history, or foraging from old farmsteads that have a lot of history. So it's kind of fun to push and pull of past forward. And I don't know, Jared's always thinking about the past and the forward. I think you're always like, thinking about new apples to plant, and I don't know,
Yeah. What's exciting me right now is I've been for quite a while growing some of these varieties that I have found with foraging, and they're coming into production, and you get to have that whole other evaluation of not just the fruit and how that performs with fermentation, but also seeing what the trees, how easy they are and how grower friendly they are with disease resistance and yield. But and also what's really something I've been excited about trying is doing my own crossbreeding. So trying to take my favorite cider apples and improve them. So that's kind of like what, as far as the conversation of the future goes, I think that I will be able to at least create better than what I currently am using through that process. And I'm also doing a bit with pears. Did some crosses of pears today.
So what do you mean by crossbreeding?
I'm isolating blossoms to keep pollinators out, and then selecting the variety I want, the pollen from the variety I want to introduce. And then in the fall, I'm removing those seeds from the fruit that results, and germinating that and creating new trees. So I've got about 100 trees in my basement right now.
Well, wait, I thought that the magic of apples is that every seed is a new, unique tree.
They are going to be all unique new trees, but they will have the same two parents, just, like we are unique crosses of our parents. And then when you get a variety you like, you just graft from that to create the same variety.
And is that something that's common practice? Because I don't know too much about how you propagate apples, but I've heard about grafting. If you guys want to tell me what that is, grafting. And I never knew that you could actually control the breeding.
Yeah, what I'm doing is a very long-term project. It's not going to result in anything in the next year or two. But yeah, if you want to reproduce the same variety of apple, you must graft. You must take a piece of the most previous growth of wood and splice it onto a rootstock, or either a selected rootstock for whatever growing conditions you want, or you top work another previous tree, cutting off the wood and splicing in that new wood. And any growth from that new scion is the new variety.
Yeah, but what you're doing is beyond that.
Yes, so I'm trying to create new varieties with controlling the pollination, and then those seeds are being raised in a nursery to evaluate the growing characteristics of disease resistance and how quickly they come into bearing, and then evaluating the fruit from there.
So Zach, is Jared ahead of most of you guys?
Jared's definitely thinking about the future of fruit in Cornish for sure. Well, I mean, I think talking about crossbreeding, it's something that state universities are doing, and on a very specific level to do certain things. They're doing it with vegetables, they're doing it with fruits. Cornell's doing a great job of doing that already with cider apples, but it's fun to see individual cider makers doing it on like a very nano-focused, terroir-driven, very specific place-based way. And also thinking about our own individual palates and flavors. That's the exciting thing, is like each of us can create our own palate-based nursery/orchard eventually that's based on what we like. That's what gets me excited about cider. It's like, imagine if you're a brewer and you can create your own grain that's specific to your place. It's a lot easier to do that with apple orchards than it is with grain. And I think about it from that level, and that gets me excited about cider. And playing around with that. I mean, there's a lot of future with that. I mean, we're doing a lot of things that probably are going to outlive us and are going to be handed down to our kids, which is also there's a lot of hard questions with that, a lot of difficult questions with that. But
yeah, well, and like Zach said, I mean, that was one reason I kind of got interested in this, is like with the brewing industry, the ingredients are all purchased, and creating our own flavor profiles and have something that is completely unique to our place. I feel like that's a big driver for me of not only like the forage fruit, but the breeding to create something that is, what I'm looking for, and it isn't replicable by anybody.
Hey, we're going to take a short break. We'll be back in a few minutes on Beer Sessions Radio. All right. Hey, welcome back to Beer Sessions Radio on Heritage Radio Network. Hey, I'm Jimmy Carboni. I'm the host. It's our 15th year on Heritage Radio Network. Support us, become a member at heritageradionetwork.org. We're up here at Portland, Maine, not Oregon, Portland, Maine, for the CiderFeast Portland, the first one. It was my pleasure to be up here and be part of it. Talking with a couple of cider makers. One more time, you guys introduce yourselves.
I'm Jared Carr, co-owner and cider maker of Cornish Cider Company.
Damon Sawyer, content creator, Bone and Bottle Reviews.
And this is Zach Kaiser from Absalom Cider Company.
So we let these guys talk, and they're talking about breeding and other things that apply to apples. The same as beer. I think not too long ago, most people would think that beer came from chemicals. And Pete Brown, a great English author, wrote that. Where do you think most people, how do most people think that they get hard cider?
I guess they ask, a common question I get is, so is this beer? And I think a lot of people aren't familiar with the process of producing the products they drink. So yeah, a lot of people so this is an apple beer. And I'm like, well, no, not exactly. But yeah, I think there is a little bit of a disconnect there of people knowing how your product is made.
Yeah, there's quite a misconception in the industry that cider is brewed. Like there's a lot of breweries making cider, but they still on their cans or bottles they'll still label that this cider was brewed, and it really drives misinformation in the industry. People have different expectations, and I guess it can get kind of picky on what kind of culture and what kind of terminology you're using, but you really want to make sure that everyone has the right knowledge and to make sure that they know what they're talking about. Cider is more like wine than beer. It's fermented. You just put it in a vat at your basic stage with some yeast and let it go. There's no heat involved. It's not like brewing or distilling. So it's important, even with an event like this, that we drive home that cider is cider. It's not beer. It's not anything else. It's its own thing. It's very important to drive that home to people.
I do feel we've been doing CiderFeast events for quite a number of years, and I feel like people are a little more sophisticated. That they come in where their first cider wasn't a down east or something that's back sweetened. I think people are definitely, when they say they want dry, they wanted to try Cornish and Absalom and Portersfield and Rocky Ground. And when I steered them to them, they really like that. So these words like dry, semi-dry, semi-sweet, I mean, what do they really mean? Because if we like dry wine, you also like dry cider.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes I think about how beer had a really great, at least when I started in this industry getting into beer actually, and I remember reading Garrett Oliver's Brewmaster's Table, and it got me enamored with a lot of the history of it. And I think sometimes we forget that there's a history of cider making that's really even deeper than beer making to a certain extent. And we forget about that. And a lot of those, the way that cider was made is dry. That's kind of how it originally was made, and it's a much more of a natural process of the fermentation versus kind of adding chemicals, back sweetening, pasteurizing. Those technologies are more recent, and I think a lot of the cider makers in Maine, and I definitely, Absalom Cider thinks about this as a very traditional technique, a very old world technique, and we think about our ciders in that way. And that's why we lean towards dry. But I do think that there is fun applications like ice cider, which we also do as well, where you're concentrating juice and you're making a sweet product, but it is still very natural in its essence, and very kind of showcases what the true essence of a fruit is. So I think it's more thinking about it from maybe rather than differentiating between dry, semi-dry, and sweet, and just thinking about the way the process style, thinking about that. In a lot of ways that beers get process style driven in that way. I think sometimes that could be beneficial, but I also think cider is its own thing, 100%, and we should describe it that way,
Yeah. And what about for you, Jared?
I agree a lot with what Zach was saying. And as far as the processes of creating your ciders that have any residual sugar, whether it's pasteurization or filtration, such, I do a couple of off dry ciders, or I did one ice cider, and sort of I'm experimenting more with utilizing colder temperatures, which is unfortunately getting harder and harder with the winters we've been having. But I think they're all great and they appeal to different palates. But I agree that it should be looked at more like wine. It's a fermented fruit juice and similar production style. But unfortunately, with beer drinkers, often if I say that, as far as comparing a product being brewed, if you tell them that it's made more like wine, that's almost kind of off-putting to them, before they've even tried it, unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately, you really need to taste the good ciders, and sometimes an event like this is the only way to do it, or a certain retail shop or something else. What's a question that you have for these cider makers, Damon? Because I know you've been all over the Northeast. You're just out at CiderCon. Pick one question, they'll both ask.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So when I came to Maine in 21, I didn't know anything about Maine cider. Have you found that when you've gone on social media, or just like when you've had people come to your tasting room, what's the number one driver of people to your tasting rooms or buying your products and reaching out to you? Is it local? Is it people seeing stuff online? How are people finding you?
I think it's a grassroots approach. When we started our tasting room, it's one of these things where you work so hard to get your tasting room set up, and you're never sure if anyone's going to show up, which is both scary and, our town, Winthrop, has, less than 10,000 people live there year round. In the wintertime, it's less than 5,000 people. So you don't really know if people are going to show up, and you have to adapt on the fly. So, I think we started off serving beer and ciders and wines. So we made our own ciders, and then we would serve wines and beers as well. And we just kind of integrated more and more things into our program. So also cocktails and other things like that, because it allows it to be accessible in some aspects, but we can still then tell our story, tell why cider makes sense in this world of just a normal bar. So it's kind of, be accessible to your local community, but also tell your story and be really, really, really passionate about it. And if you do those two things, I think there's a lot of success that can happen that way. We're just lucky that a lot of local support, a lot of excitement about cider. And I think when you try people on dry cider, they're surprised right away because they think that cider is one thing. And it's not. We offer 15 different things on tap at our tasting room. Cider can be 15 different things at once. It could be 700 different things at once. And I think showing people over time that there's a lot of different types of cider. There's not just a certain type of sweeter cider. That's the first step. And we're getting there.
And we're trying to cover a little intro for our listeners, but these guys can go really deep. And Jared, you want to answer Damon's question?
Sure. So we don't have a tasting room. So getting people to introduce to our cider through great events like we had today, and then probably half of our wholesale accounts are ones that I have gone in and dropped off a sample and talked to the owner. But another half are ones that people have tried our product at one of those other accounts and then reached out to us. So that's kind of how we don't have a on-premise location to have people come to, unfortunately. But that's just basically how we've.
It's great. You guys are really setting the bar for Maine cider. So I want to ask you about, before we go, particularly some of the ciders that we tried today. So for you, Zach, Float Away and the Strawberry. Now, I'm going to introduce this by saying Float Away has been on tap. It's on tap at Oxbow. It's on tap at Anoche. What is the quality? How do you describe that cider? Because that's my go-to cider now when I'm here in Portland. And then you're going to tell me about the Strawberry. There's a secret thing about that I'll tell people why I liked it.
Yeah. Float Away is one of the first ciders we made. And our goal with that one was kind of making a cider that's both influenced by English and French cider tradition, but has a lot of kind of our own take on the fruit. So it's kind of our fruit in there. So we do a lot of. So for Float Away specifically, half of it is oak aged and half of it is stainless steel aged. So we're taking Ashmead's kernel, Harrison apples, Newtown Pippin apples, Northern Spy, Rhode Island Greening, some of our favorite heirloom varieties, fermenting half of them in oak, fermenting half of them in stainless, blending them together at the end, and it kind of...
Is that what's in the picture right now?
Yeah.
We got to try that.
Yeah.
But what I'm going to ask you is so it's a dry cider. I've had a lot of Spanish ciders like Sidra, so it has this Sidra-esque quality, but it's not Sidra. How do you describe how it tastes?
I definitely think it's got that Sidra kind of style, and it's definitely got that Sidra kind of style.
It's a little funky, but it's not acidic.
It's native yeast fermented, so again, it's got that native yeast kind of influence in there, but trying to make sure that it's still a very clean flavor, that it's a flavor that is apple forward, kind of expressing the flavor of the fruit is kind of the first and foremost. And it's something that a lot of bars get really excited about. Like Oxbow, they're one of our biggest supporters from the beginning. My business partner, Ryan, who used to work with Tim a lot. So there's a good relationship there, and it works really well for them. It's a cider that's dry but still apple-y at its core. People think of apples when they drink it; they don't forget about apple being in it. But it almost plays in this Sidra white wine, chocolate Spanish white wine kind of space, which I think we get really excited about. It's very versatile.
And there's a little hint of funk too. Yeah. Then the strawberry one. Tell us what that cider was, and I'm going to say what it is. On the nose, it smells like fresh strawberry, but it's not a strawberry cider.
Yeah, it throws people because I think it's a dry strawberry cider that really it throws the smell of the strawberries right at you. It's called Jewel of June. So we ferment this strawberry cider in stainless. It's a blend of strawberries that are macerated basically with apples in stainless, and we do punch downs. We do a little bit of pump overs as well to kind of drive this very fruit forward flavor profile, very tangy strawberry flavor. And we keep it very fresh. It's one of our shortest aged ciders before we bottle it. So basically we pick the organic strawberries in June from Goranson Farm in Dresden. We add those strawberries in. I do a lot of processing throughout for the next 60 days during fermentation. And then it probably needs another month or so, maybe sometimes 2 months to sit in tank and settle out, and then we're going right into tank to bottle. And it's a very fresh but cool expression of strawberries. And again, it's all native yeast. It's completely naturally fermented. It's as pure as it gets in terms of.
I'll say that's date night cider.
For sure, I love it.
Because I love it. I want to just keep smelling those strawberries. And Jared, for you started us with. You said your core cider. Tell us what that was, because that was another one that wow, it was really dry. I did keep drinking it all night.
Sure. So our flagship batch is Common Fruit, which is kind of our take on a dry pub cider. It's our favorite varieties that we can find growing at our local orchards, and then we blend in also some of our favorite foraged apples. A percentage of it is generally in some oak, and it's also often a blend of 1 to 3 years old. Basically, every new batch bottled has about 25% of the previous batch bottled in there.
Is that what we're drinking now?
Yeah, you're drinking that now, yeah.
Yeah, so how do you describe this, Zach? I mean, this is like, wow, it's like a very drinkable, dry, fine cider, and I always like to use the term fine cider going way back, and no one's using it yet, but this is fine cider. So cheers to you, Jared.
Thank you. Cheers.
Yeah, how do you describe this cider as a taster, Zach?
What I love about Jared's fruit is I get an overripe apple flavor in a good way. Like it's very, it gets like a fruit leathery kind of space that I love. And Common Fruit has this both floral aromatic aspect and then a deep like fruit caramel kind of like space that it enters in the palate kind of on the back end, which is kind of exciting. Kind of brings me on an adventure both ways.
And I'm going to get a little weird. You keep hearing that machinery noise. That's actually Angus from Rocky Ground Cider. He's outside with his chainsaw. He's doing some pruning right now. Angus, stop doing the pruning. All right. A little more about your cider.
This is our flagship. This is the batch that we started with back in 2017. And this is the batch that is available all year round. But yeah, it's just meant to kind of be a easy drinking, but not too simple, cider to have with every meal.
And then some of the other ones that you tasted us on, are you trying to go somewhere with the other ciders, or this is just expression of what you're getting?
Well, I'd like to.
Yes, is it intentional? That's my question.
So the other batches, a lot of the batches I'm making are where I'm utilizing cold temperatures to either freeze the juice or freeze the apples. A lot of my favorite varieties of apple that I'd like to be using, I'm growing now, but they are not at the point of bearing enough fruit. So I'm taking varieties that may not necessarily be typical of what you would use in hard cider production and trying to get creative with. I've always loved ice ciders, but I wanted something that wasn't as a dessert beverage, but still captured that aroma. And so, and maybe just off dry. So I'm working on some of those, although we've had some challenging winters. And then I've also done some that are completely dried. They're just, but I've also concentrated them 50%. And then I'm experimenting with doing batches where I take the apples, put them outside, freeze them solid, bring them in, let them thaw, and then the juice that you press from that is very clear and pale, and it just changes the flavor profile. Like it makes a Macintosh or a Cortland have a really intense stone fruit flavor. So it's fun to just see what you can do differently with that.
And another show I want to talk to you guys next time about, because we were joking about Angus and pruning and your hybrids and tree care. We're not going into that because that might be another show. But that's all I can say, man. What did I miss? Because I was just going to finish something with him.
I mean, there's a whole foraging rabbit hole we can get into in this state, and there's a history there that I think right away Angus definitely is the one that comes to mind in terms of foraging. But there's a whole subset of people that MOFGA, which is Maine Organic Farmers Growers Association. They host Apple Camp every year as a part of the Maine Heritage Orchard, and what has stemmed up from that has kind of been this incredible foraging community meets homesteading community in that kind of world. And Angus makes some incredible forage ciders, but everyone is kind of working in this, like, they love foraging for apples in this state, and it's definitely one of the states because of how much woods we have, how much unsettled woods we have. There's a lot of foraging. I mean, even Aaron Burr comes up every once in a while to forage for apples. So there's a lot of apples around. So that there's something fun, and there's something that's kind of you can't touch it. It's a very natural thing that gets exciting about that. You should do a whole podcast on that.
That's what I don't want to ask you. But the last thing, impacting what you're growing, and in the wild apples, you mentioned climate change just a little bit. So climate change on you as a cider maker and apple grower?
Well, fire blight is a bigger factor than it used to be. A bacterial disease that is, if untreated, certain varieties are more susceptible than others, but it can kill the tree. And essentially, it's another aspect of these forage varieties and new varieties we're growing. You have to factor in which ones have more resistance to that. It's something as our seasons are warmer, it's becoming a bigger issue for us.
So what happens? A long cold, does it eliminate that?
Well, just it is favorable to have a warm and wet conditions are favorable for that, for fire blight. So we're having more warmer growing seasons than we ever used to before, and it's becoming a bigger problem and spreading.
Another great show that we could have. I want to thank you guys for coming out. Damon, what did you think overall, the first CiderFeast Portland?
Oh yeah, attending the last few CiderFeasts all over the Northeast. This was definitely a success. I was shocked at the amount of people that came. My limited knowledge of the Maine cider community led me to believe maybe this wouldn't be the most popular event, though. Like, it helped that we were at a brewery downtown, a very favorable location. But man, the people came out in droves, very knowledgeable, and just appreciated everything that was going on. There was such a variety, from sweet cider to the driest, most tannic cider that you can get your hands on anywhere in the country, and everyone was just loving it in droves. So I think this has been a fantastic event, and we're going to find people coming out more in the future. Maine is a hidden gem for cider. New York is still the best. Sorry to say that, but Maine is awesome. Maine is awesome, and I think it's been very insular, I feel like. People in Maine maybe know a little bit more than anywhere else of Maine cider, but I think Maine cider is really going to start hitting the eastern seaboard here. People are really going to start experiencing it and finding it out, and they're going to start enjoying it.
Thanks, Damon. And I know you're also in touch with a lot of Ontario, Canada cider makers who we're going to also be talking to. You guys, thanks so much, Zach and Jared and Damon. Also, shout out to John and Joy from Fogtown, who were on earlier, and our intern, Sophia Hooper, on Meet and 3. She got to talk with a couple of the guys, Gene from Whaleback and maybe Angus from rocky ground as well. So there's going to be a little more content. Thanks so much for tuning in. Big shout out to our engineer, Armin Spengen. I'm Jimmy Carboni. We'll catch you next time on Beer Sessions Radio. All right. Thanks so much, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Beer Sessions Radio is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network. Food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.